Kate Brown executive order removed as the order is no longer in force. And then there were some other comments that have been received. I guess you all have received that. Are there any further comments that anybody would like to add to the minutes? Seeing none, the chair would be pleased to have a motion to accept the minutes as amended.
So moved.
And a seconder?
Second.
It's because she did it live last time, Commissioner Swisher. Do we have any members of the public, either on Zoom or on the telephone, Ila? And could I ask then, for the members of the public, are there any items which you wish to raise for the Planning Commission's attention that do not appear on the others of the agenda?
I believe the attendee is participating in the hearing.
Seeing none, then we will move to action items. The first of which is a public hearing, and I will hand it over, please, to Tanya Saltzman to lead us through the formal process.
Thank you, Chair Hudson. For the record, Tanya Saltzman, Senior Planner. I'm going to share my screen here and then go through a series of opening statements describing the Zoom procedures.
I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Oh, really? Okay. Should I speak? Is that better?
That's a little better, thank you.
I will speak into the mic
Old and deaf.
closely. One moment, please, while I share that screen. All right. This is a public hearing for marijuana retail and reporting text amendments, file number 247-210-000-579-TA, to amend the Deschutes County zoning ordinance to extend the permitted hours for marijuana retail businesses and to modify marijuana annual reporting requirements. The Planning Commission will hear oral testimony, receive written testimony, and consider the testimony submitted at this hearing. The hearing is also being recorded. The Commission may make a decision on this matter today, continue the public hearing to a date certain, or leave the written record open for a specified period of time. The hearing will be conducted in the following order. The staff, in this case also the applicant, will give a report on this proposal. We will then open the hearing to all present and ask people to present testimony. You may also provide the Commission with a copy of written testimony. Questions to and from the chair may be entertained at any time at the chair's discretion. Cross-examination of people testifying will not be allowed. However, if any person wishes to ask a question of another person during that person's testimony, please direct your question to the chair after being recognized. The chair is free to decide whether or not to ask such questions of the person testifying. Prior to the commencement of the hearing, any party may challenge the qualifications of any commissioner for conflict of interest. This challenge must be documented with specific reasons supported by facts. Should any commissioner be challenged, the member may disqualify himself or herself, withdraw from the hearing, or make a statement on the record of their capacity to hear and decide this issue. This hearing will also be conducted using Zoom. Following my outline of the Zoom procedures, we will ask if any members of the Commission need to set forth any information that may be perceived as a conflict of interest. Now I'll just quickly go over the Zoom hearing procedure. Zoom participants are either panelists or attendees. The panelists are on video and can speak and hear. The attendees at the beginning can only view the panelists. At the beginning of the meeting, all microphones will be muted to prevent audio feedback. At the start of the hearing, the panelists will be the Commission and the county staff only, and the attendees will be the general public. County staff will then present its report and answer any questions from the Planning Commission. Then it's public testimony. There is no sign-in sheet if you're doing remote testimony. So whether in person or remote, please provide your name and your mailing address at the beginning of your testimony. In addition, please clearly state any procedural objections, if any, to the hearings process as part of testimony. The chair will next accept public testimony in the following order. Attendees participating by attending in person, then by computer, and then those participating by phone. For computer attendees, they'll be elevated from attendee status to panelist, and they'll be unmuted. They provide their testimony, then they will be returned to attendee status, and their audio will be muted once again. And then the next person is selected, and this process will repeat until everybody participating by computer has completed their testimony. Then we will move on to telephone attendees. They will be identified by the last 4 digits of the phone number. They will be elevated to panelist, and they will answer whether or not they wish to provide testimony. If they say no, they will be returned back to attendee status. If they say yes, they will provide their testimony and then will be returned to attendee status, and their audio will be muted, and so on for the next attendees. So, and then staff comments. If requested by the commission, the staff will provide closing comments.
So the record will show that Commissioner Altman joined the meeting at the beginning, but has had to go to attend to an urgent matter, and is expecting to come back to the meeting, and it might be during the public testimony. When Commissioner Altman returns, I shall ask our video handler in the corner to let me know, and we can actually ask her the same disclosure questions, so we don't have a commissioner sitting there under circumstances that are in fact not acceptable. So returning to our process here, does any commissioner have anything to disclose, and if so, please state the nature of the same and whether you can proceed?
No.
Seeing none,
Does any party wish to challenge any commissioner based on conflicts of interest?
so we will take it any party externally who is on the computer. We have no internal audience here. And anybody on the telephone. So as no challenges have been presented prior to opening the hearing, does anybody have any procedural objections to the public hearing? First of all, anybody on a computer. Secondly, anybody on a telephone. We have no in-person attendees. Seeing and hearing no objections, the hearing is now open, and staff will proceed with a brief staff report.
Thank you, Chair Hudson. Now on to the topic of the matter. This proposal is 2 parts. The first part is to extend the permitted hours for marijuana retail businesses, and the second part is to modify marijuana annual reporting requirements. A little bit of background. Both of these amendments were suggested by Deschutes County marijuana business owners. This began, we had an initial discussion with the Planning Commission on May 13th, and then a subsequent discussion on the with the Board of County Commissioners on May 24th, as this was essentially an addition to our work plan. So it was a kind of a late-breaking addition. And based on those discussions, the Board of County Commissioners then directed staff to go ahead and initiate this text amendment process. So this is where we are now, our first public hearing with the Planning Commission, and then it'll go to a public hearing with the Board of County Commissioners at a later date. The first amendment is pertaining to retail hours. It changes the hours of operation for marijuana retailing from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m., which is the current hours, to 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., and that's in line with Oregon Liquor Control Commission OLCC hours. There's currently 2 existing marijuana retail businesses in Deschutes County, unincorporated Deschutes County, which is what we have jurisdiction over. And the owners in their correspondence have cited competitive disadvantage with neighboring communities, which generally allow longer hours. They're not all necessarily with the OLCC hours based on their own kind of individual preferences, but they are permitted to extend their hours to those OLCC hours. The next is for annual reporting. The proposed amendments add text to state an annual report shall be submitted, if requested, to the Community Development Department. And if requested is that new amendment. And that just gives discretion to either the Board of County Commissioners or a group as yet undetermined to request those annual reports rather than automatically requesting them every year. The current code requires businesses to submit their annual reports by February 1st of each year. These annual reports document their conditions of land use approval, things like canopy size, are they complying with secure waste disposal? What is their odor control system? What is their noise control system? These are things that were approved in their original decision. They just have to state if they are still complying with those or if those have changed at all. The licensed businesses, in other words, those who have OLCC licenses and are growing marijuana, this is in the case of production, which is the vast majority, and processing of the businesses that are subject to annual reporting. The licensed businesses must pay a $796 fee. Those who are unlicensed, in other words, they're still waiting for their license, so they're not growing, they're not subject to that fee. I believe that fee might have gone up as of July 1st by 3%, but I have not done the math on that. So $796 is what it was last year. Staff then, after processing each of those reports and vetting it with the original land use decision, we then schedule site visits, usually in the summer or the fall. It's varied from year to year. It used to be in the late winter, early spring, but we realized that was logistically more difficult. So now they're in the summer and the fall. Staff, usually in groups of either one or two, go out to each site. They verify those conditions of approval that they can verify, such as, is your odor control system working? Is your noise control manageable? Those elements. So we have not yet done the site visits for this year, but we anticipate doing approximately 34 of those businesses, just to give you a sense of the scale that we're operating at. In previous years, 2018, 2019, and 2020, we observed 100% compliance with those conditions of approval. That's for those who are growing. For those who are not yet licensed, we verified that they were not growing marijuana, and that was also 100% compliance in those years. And also, it's important to note that the OLCC has its own set of inspections. They call it, I think, proactive compliance, and they do it a number of times throughout the process. The first one is prior to the license being issued, and then subsequent visits. Some of those categories, those things that they look at, overlap with the Deschutes County site visits. They're not looking at it exclusively from a land use perspective, as we are, but there are some overlaps. And that was claimed in the original request from a business, saying that there are some redundancies in those inspections. As far as public comments, we've received one comment from a written comment from a marijuana retailer in support of changing the retail hours to the OLCC hours. I've provided that letter by email to the Planning Commission. It's also available on paper here at the table, and it's uploaded in the file. This is the same retailer who actually provided the original request to the board, and that is all that we have received. There's been no public comments concerning the annual reporting. The next steps, the options to move forward. We can continue the hearing to a date certain. The Planning Commission can close the hearing, leave the written record open to a date certain, close the hearing and set a date for deliberations, or close the hearing and commence deliberations right now. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions or proceed to public testimony, and I believe there is one here.
So if we could, two things. First of all, before we open for general questions, let me just check, first of all, whether Commissioner Altman has joined us yet. And she has not. So first of all, what's the current thinking of staff about who and under what circumstances an annual report might be requested if the amendment is recommended and then accepted by the board, recommended by the PC, accepted by the BOCC?
I think the general intent is that staff would presumably approach the board once every year before the normal time that we would start requesting those annual reports, and check in with the board and see if they would like to proceed with that process each year. Maybe they have received reports about something or whatever. That would be their judgment to make. That's from my perspective, that is the primary conduit of how that would happen. I think it would be possible for it to come from other departments as well. There is the option of code compliance, perhaps, although they do their own investigations if there is perceived to be an issue. If there's a complaint called in, they kind of do their own, they have their own system of compliance. Sometimes we obviously collaborate if they want to see, when someone was licensed or that sort of thing, but that's how I imagine these requests would come from, kind of on an annual basis.
So the bottom line is that there would be an annual check-in at one of the board meetings with the Board of County Commissioners to see if there was any reason that the board was aware of that somebody might want to. As the letter came in, giving written testimony rather late, would it be fair to summarize it to say that the correspondent effectively gave some financial quantitation of the degree of loss that was being claimed by businesses operating under the county's current hours versus those allowed by the state?
Yes, I think that's a good characterization. The commenter noted that people who are perhaps unaware of their hours, they might be from out of town, they end up going to neighboring businesses, and then they don't become repeat customers just because they've gone to this other place. It can also be a staffing issue. They have the opportunity to hire potentially slightly more staff if there's longer hours, which just, however incremental, that does provide additional jobs in the region.
So, Commissioners, any questions,
Yes.
please? Commissioner
Thank you.
Crawford.
Back to the issue of requests for visits. Would that be to an individual producer, processor, or would that just become blanket for everyone?
That's to be determined, to be honest. I would personally envision it being all or nothing. That's what I would think. We're not meant to single out, that's where, if there's a perceived issue, that's generally a code compliance issue. If there's allegedly a problem with a specific property, that's not the purpose of our annual reporting. It's just in general, it's to see overall compliance with the whole group.
Okay, thank you.
Any follow-up comments, Nick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do think it would be all or nothing. And I was going to chime in after the last bit when Chair Hudson asked you about would we check in with the board and when might we do that. I do just want to share, we haven't defined what that process would look like yet, but the legislature did adopt House Bill 3295, and it does require counties that opted out of marijuana between 2018 and 2021 and wish to receive taxes. In order to receive taxes per House Bill 3295, and I just pulled the bill up here, counties are required to establish a Cannabis Advisory Panel, a CAP, and it identifies who must serve on that panel. People from either the Board of County Commissioners or their designee, a designee of the county sheriff's office, a member of the public, a water master, a representative of the county who is knowledgeable about economic development in the county. So there's a series of people that would serve on this panel. In addition, the bill also identifies what issues they might address. Issues presented by the production, processing, wholesaling, and distribution of marijuana in the unincorporated county subject to the jurisdiction of the county. The use of the monies transferred to the county, increases in public safety measures related to marijuana use and marijuana. Anyway, so the bill establishes who would serve on the panel, what the panel's general issues are. But one of the things we've discussed at the staff level is that could also be a panel that we would check in with on an annual basis to determine if we should conduct those annual reports and inspections or not. Since we're likely to establish such a panel per the board's direction, that could be another good use of the panel.
So one way or another, there would be a solid check-in on an annual basis.
Exactly. Ultimately, a board.
Swisher, please.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Mr. Chair, and again, I just want to clarify, that is if the case that the county receives marijuana taxes even though they had opted out. So that's that very narrow case where that needs to be formed.
That's exactly right. And so last week, Community Development and legal staff met with the Board of County Commissioners, among other departments, to discuss the outcomes of the 2021 legislative session. Included in that discussion, we did discuss this bill and the timeline in which to establish a cannabis advisory panel. And so we discussed coming back to the board, not likely in late July, given that that's just next week, but likely sometime in early August, to discuss and to confirm their interest in doing so, in their process to appoint those members, and then when to begin that process so that the county can collect those taxes. And I think it's important for the Planning Commission to know is that it's the Cannabis Advisory Panel. It's not just marijuana. So this panel could also address other issues that the Planning Commission has discussed recently, including hemp, and we'll meet again with the commission to discuss that in the near future.
But one of the options, it is possible that the county commissioners would choose not to apply for that money. Is that a correct assumption? If they choose not to, then there wouldn't be a panel and
Right.
et cetera.
That's right. That's right. There was a lot of discussion over creating the panel during the legislative session, because it's not something, as one of our commissioners would say, the Board of Commissioners didn't ask for. It was something that was required as part of this. Another commissioner, county commissioner, supports it and pointed to this model being created based on a model that exists in Southern Oregon. So it's our understanding that and expectation that the board will establish the panel, and we would move forward. Now, there's a whole nother question that is a much bigger one, and let's not get into this now, but if the county were to opt back in at some point, then such a panel wouldn't be necessary. So that's...
So all that would go away if the
It
county
could.
chose to opt back.
It's hard to say. We don't know. I mean, for example, Southern Oregon, it's still allowed, and they have it, and it's a great check-in. I just raise it in the context of a panel that could advise the staff and the Board of Commissioners on whether we conduct the annual inspections and annual reporting and assess the associated fee on an annual basis.
Thank you.
Please, go ahead. Vice Chair Kiras.
So just a question about the wording. I know that we're probably going to talk about that in our discussion, but just a clarification question. So if, let's say this panel or some other entity says, hey, we really would like to do these inspections this year, they request that to the Board of County Commissioners, and then can, like, if this were approved as written right now, can the Board of County Commissioners then say, thanks for the idea, but we're not going to request that? Or is this language saying, if requested by the Board of County, is it saying if the board requests it, we'll do it, or is it saying if any of these entities request it, then we'll do it? And the board, we do it regardless of what the board wants.
That's an excellent question, and this is to be determined. I think right now, we've just kind of put it out there as very vague, and, perhaps the Planning Commission wants to delve into how they'd want to kind of hone that language. Yeah, it could be, if requested by the Board of County Commissioners, that could be the phrase, or change some other phrase, and that's up to kind of, that would happen in deliberation.
Although it's not part of the amendment, we would be free to make a recommendation on a mechanism if we needed to. But it does sound as though there's a lot to be sorted out still
And
at the
that's-
board level.
Yeah, it sounds like we could it says in the packet we could discuss it during our
Yeah.
discussion.
Well, you could make a recommendation on it also.
Mr. Chair, one other question regarding
Ms.
that.
Swisher, please go ahead.
Thank you. One other question regarding that. If this panel recommends it, does the county then have the authority to levy the fee, like the fee is currently? So if they requested that, the fee would be leveled to help pay for the procedure?
That's correct. The fee is in the Community Development Department's adopted fee schedule, and the Board of Commissioners adopts the fee schedule on an annual basis. Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, I see that Commissioner Altman has not joined us, and I will ask either Nick or Tanya if you have any other comments, clarifications before we move on to the public hearing, part of the public hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The only discussion that we had after the work session last week, we do think it's worthy to, it's a worthwhile exercise this year to review the fee, to determine if the fee remains accurate. We believed it certainly was as we started the program. We're not certain if it will be going forward. So we expect to evaluate the fee this next year. We think that the Planning Commission.
That would not require any input in our deliberations.
Correct. I just wanted to share that as a follow-up.
Okay, Commissioners, if you agree, we'll move on now to the testimony from members of the public. We have no members of the public present in person. Let us see if we have any on the computer link, please. And we do. If we could have them elevated, please. I'm just going to wait. If you could unmute yourself, and also if you could put your video on, so I don't just assume it's Joe Stapleton. I've been caught that way before. It was somebody's wife. Mr. Stapleton, are you hearing us?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can. So you're unmuted, but you are without video.
Trying to fix that right now. There we go.
There you go, please. For the record, could we have your name and full name and also your street address, please?
My name is Joseph Stapleton. I live at 52410 on Trenton Avenue. That's in
Please.
Bend, Oregon 97703.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed. Please go ahead with your testimony.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. I own one of the 2 retail stores in the county currently, and we have been open since March 6th of this year. And it took us about 4.5 years to get open, to go through the whole process. And things are going great, and we're happy to be there. But the 7 o'clock closing time really has become a bit of an issue for us. It just seems really early to have to close. In the summertime, it's still light outside. People are getting off work at that time. I would say in the 4 months we've been open, every single day, people show up between 7 and 8, frustrated that they can't buy product. And, we lose customers, we lose business. And we are a small shop that, caters to the local community down there. And we're not catching highway traffic. And for us, that 3 hours a day over 365 days a year, it really adds up and affects our bottom line. And again, it really does affect our employees, because we either have 2 very short shifts or a really long shift. And that extra few hours would make a huge difference for us. And I would love to see it changed.
Joe, you made your case very clearly, and Tanya and Susan Altman has just joined us. So can she participate? Okay. Give me 1 second, Joe. We just need to make sure that we can qualify Commissioner Altman. So, Susan, first of all, I need to ask you whether you have anything to disclose, and if so, please could you disclose the nature of the same and state whether you can proceed with this public hearing.
I have nothing to disclose, and yes, I may proceed with this public hearing.
And so we will wait and see whether anybody, either on the video or on the telephone, wishes to challenge you based on conflicts of interest. And Joe very kindly didn't move a muscle. And as no challenges are presented prior to the opening of the hearing for Commissioner Altman, does anybody have any procedural objections to the public hearing proceeding with Commissioner Altman present? I think you must be made of wax, Joe. You're really very still. Well done. And anybody on the telephone? I think we have nobody. Hearing and seeing no objections, then we will proceed with the evidence. We're at the testimony stage, Susan, and Joe, in fact, is the first person giving testimony, and I was just about to open it for clarifying questions from the commissioners, including yourself, because I know you're slightly psychic. So anybody like to ask any questions of Joe Stapleton, please?
Mr.
Commissioner
Chairman,
Swisher,
I have
please
a
go ahead.
question. Joe, how close is the nearest retail within a city limits to your establishment, approximately?
The closest one is likely 5 miles. There's another one in the process that will be closer, that's probably 2 miles. But yeah, it's about 5-6 miles away, I'd say.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Please go ahead, Commissioner Crawford.
Joe, what impact do you think this would have on your bottom line? In other words, do you anticipate a fair amount of business having an additional 3 hours in the evening and maybe 2 hours in the morning?
Yeah, the truth is, I don't even know that we would open any earlier. I definitely think it's hard to say. I don't think it's going to be, double the revenue or anything like that. But I also think it would just help us catch people who haven't been into the store. And as I said, a lot of people get off work. And I don't know, I would say at least 15-20%. I mean, we're open 10 hours now. That's almost a third extra of time. And a lot of people are out. We're right on the Burgess there, where people are coming back from the lakes at that time. And like I said, we turn people away every day. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Kiris.
I have a question.
I thought you might, Susan. Go ahead.
And I just thought of it. Just for the record, I have read all of the materials about this topic before this meeting, and of course prior to all the other meetings where we've had this discussion. And I read Mr. Stapleton's testimony that he submitted that was sent out to us later today. I am assuming that if Mr. Stapleton has the ability to extend his hours, that's not necessarily a requirement. So following up on the other commissioners' questions, if he did open his extended hours and he didn't find it necessarily more profitable for his business, I assume he would have the opportunity to operate at whatever business hours he chose.
Joe, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, I would hope so. It's definitely a good question. I mean, I think even till 9 o'clock would definitely be significant, and that would just be something we would have to address after 6 months and seeing what difference it made. That being said, I think there's also something to be said for just that convenience for those few people who do want to come in at 9:45. We're open 365 days a year. Some days we don't do as much business, but just purely being there available for everyone, I think we would probably stick to that 10 o'clock if we were able to.
Any comeback, Susan, that you wish, please? Thank you. Just for the record, so Mr. Stapleton, at least as far as I was reading, was not the correspondent. Was there a letter from Mr. Stapleton?
No,
Okay.
Mr. Stapleton is just providing testimony today, and the letter was from the other retailer.
Thanks.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. That's fine. It's just, yeah. We hold that one back. Go ahead, Vice Chair Kiris.
That was actually me scratching my ear, but thank you for asking.
But Joe came all this way from the kitchen to the couch. You were asking me a question. No, please, I was joking. Mr. Stapleton, we're not usually this happy. It's just we very rarely get anybody nowadays coming to join us, certainly not in person. So it's even great to have you on Zoom. I thank you very much indeed for your testimony. And in case you didn't see the letter, the other letter that we received probably was the only other retailer in Deschutes County, and his story, his evidence, testimony was almost precisely parallel with your own, but with some quantitation. It is actually available on the website.
It is. It's been uploaded to the file through our Acela program. I could also email it to Mr. Stapleton directly if requested.
And so you could have a chance of looking to see at least what the delta could be in terms of financial gain or otherwise. Thank you very much indeed. If I may, let me look over into the corner. Do we have anybody else on computer wishing to give evidence? And I see your hat going no. May we now turn to the public telephone? Do we have anybody on the telephone? Thank you. In which case, I think we're now at the end, at least, of this session of public testimony. And I'm going to turn back to Tanya Saltzman to see whether she has anything else she would like to say. And indeed, Nick, anything clarifying?
No, thank you.
And in the absence of any further comments from staff, any questions for staff that commissioners may have, including Commissioner Altman? Thank you. All right, so we have, as you know, 4 options now in terms of closing the hearing to a date certain, the oral record being closed and leave the written record open, closing the oral record and the written record and set a date for future deliberations, or close the hearing and begin deliberations. Before I ask for a motion for one of those courses of action, may I ask the Commission, including Commissioner Altman, whether there are any items for discussion you want to bring forward before we go to ask for a motion? Please, Commissioner Kiras.
I'm just curious if, I don't know if staff can provide a little bit of information about, I know generally there's like a lot of public outreach to elicit testimony, and I just wondered if that was the same for this one, and do you guys feel good about how much public awareness there was?
I can answer that. Yeah, good question. Thank you. We did, we reached out to the retailers, as you can see. We also, following the work session a couple of weeks ago, we reached out to several prominent producers that have relationships with industry associations and let them know about the public hearing. And that was the extent of the specific outreach, besides the regular kind of legally prescribed notices in the paper. And we have a project website as well, all of that. But we did reach out to several producers that have participated in the past.
Okay, and so the legal ones that you have to do involve sending letters to nearby businesses or nearby?
Not in this case for legislative text amendments. It's for this one. It's a very tiny notice in the Bend Bulletin. That's the requirement, and it's posted in the lobby of the Community Development Department. But it's not a specific mailed notice to people. No.
Okay.
So although there wasn't any special outreach, there was actually the normal, usual, expected and required outreach.
Correct, plus a little bit of additional with some known industry people.
And if we were to leave the record open, there wouldn't be any additional outreach. It would just be if anyone else happened to.
That's correct.
It's not
Well,
like.
other than that they may see the video, obviously.
Right, exactly, yeah. Good point.
Any other
Question,
questions?
Mr. Chair.
Please go ahead, Commissioner Crawford.
Are we approaching this as a single question for the 2 topics, or are we going to split our?
Please, what's your pleasure?
I guess my pleasure on it would be, I think we have 2 questions, and I would like to handle it individually.
Then we shall do so.
Okay.
Are we ready to move to a motion as to which of these 4 courses of action we should take?
Mr. Chair,
Please.
I move to close the hearing for both of these questions and move to deliberations immediately.
I second.
So hang on, let me just restate what he said. For the record and for our recording secretary, then, there's been a motion from Commissioner Crawford that we should actually close the hearing and begin deliberations. And if I can just reiterate what Commissioner Swisher said, he said, I second it.
Great, because I heard what he said.
Well, no, I heard what he said, but yes, okay. So in that case, we can now move to our deliberations.
I think we probably need to have a vote on the motion.
Oh, okay. So let's, anybody against accepting the motion first? Seeing none. Commissioner Swisher, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Crawford?
Yes.
Vice Chair Kiras?
Yes.
And Commissioner Altman?
Yes.
Chair votes yes. So discussion, deliberation, please.
Mr. Chair,
Please go ahead, Commissioner Crawford.
I've rolled these two topics over in my mind considerably for the past couple of weeks. And
As you suggested, you're going to separate the two.
I am going to separate them.
Could I ask you to begin with whichever one you want first, please?
Okay, let's take the first one. Let's take the topic about time of operation in county areas.
So opening hours. Yep, please go ahead.
It seems to me that it's unfair for two owners of the businesses that are not within the city limits to be constrained with reduced operational hours. As the two people that have submitted testimony, this is a tremendous financial constraint upon their business, and I think we ought to move forward on allowing a change in times. I think it's ludicrous not to, in my opinion.
So if we could stick with the form now, then we are discussing the alignment of the county opening hours with the state allowed opening hours, and then we're going to move to make a recommendation or otherwise on that before discussing the other one, please. Please, Commissioner Swisher.
Chairman, I agree with that opinion, and I would like to move forward with a motion that we provide.
Can I just make sure that none of the other commissioners, particularly Commissioner Altman, who is sitting there fomenting an enormously important comment? Sure. Okay, please.
Well, again, I wanted to move ahead with that, to have a motion on the table for us to debate, and then either say yea or nay to. But I would move that we change the hours of operation for the marijuana retail community to coincide with the hours of operation that the state has prescribed.
So the motion has been made by Commissioner Swisher that we should align the county hours with the state allowed hours, and we are now looking for a seconder, please.
I'll second it.
That was seconded by Vice Chair Keras, please. Any discussion on the motion?
I agree with Dale, or Commissioner Crawford. I really think that, I mean, I can't think of a single issue that wouldn't, I mean, these are two retailers, and so if there were concerns or issues that people had, it seems like selectively applying these hours to just two people are not going to fix those issues. It would have to be, everyone would have to change their hours if there was an issue with the hours. And so it just seems really weird to have just two people basically in the same area get subjected to completely different hours than their competition.
Very good. Any other discussion? Commissioner Altman? So in general, the chair prefers to have an opportunity of clarification before we immediately move to a motion. In the past, we've dug ourselves a few holes, and unless somebody wishes to oppose the chair in that, and I'd be very happy to stand down, I would prefer to try and keep that clarification prior to motion. Okay, so the motion has been proposed and duly seconded, and it's to align the county hours with the state allowed hours. Commissioner Altman, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Vice Chair Keras?
I'll vote yes as well.
Commissioner Crawford?
Yes.
Commissioner Swisher?
I vote yes.
And the chair votes yes. That's carried unanimously. And now we will take up the second part, which was to look at the, let me get the exact wording. Can you read it for me, Tanya, please?
Yes, the annual reporting.
Oh, okay, so the annual report shall be submitted, if requested, to the Community Development Department. And any discussion for clarification before we move to a motion?
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Swisher?
I just want to reiterate the clarifications I was seeking earlier. I think I heard from Nick and Tanya was regarding the process from the state of recovering the tax money and whether that would generate any revenue to help with the reviews and the annual reporting process. So that was the clarifications, and I just wanted to point out that I've heard that answer And so I'm ready to move ahead with motions from my point of
It
view.
sounds like it would be good to try and incorporate it into a motion if you could, but let's just take the other commissioners and then I'll
Right.
come back to you.
Question, Mr. Chair. I'm still unclear on the topic of request. So if Dale Crawford comes into a Board of County Commissioner meeting and requests that all the producers go through an annual review, what's going to happen? I mean, I don't understand what the process is here with
Yeah,
this.
you and me both. Nick, Tanya?
At this point, you're correct. The language is vague as drafted, and so the Planning Commission very well may want to be more specific, if directed by the Board of County Commissioners by a certain date or something of that nature. Otherwise, we'll be relying on the legislative record, which is your discussion right now. What your intent is how we would implement and interpret the code. So it's a very good issue to discuss.
So would you have somebody in mind you'd like to propose, Dale? And we could maybe get because I think there's two important points that are covered here.
I guess I would like to see some language in there that says, as requested by the Board of County Commissioners. That would be my preference. I guess if Dale Crawford came into a meeting and requested that as a citizen, the Board of County Commissioners could take that and then make a decision upon that. But I think they should be the ones that make the decision about.
Would it be helpful if we said that it would be agreed by the Board of County Commissioners? Because I think anybody could then request it and we don't have to try and get in detail, but then the mechanism can be put in place, which by the sound of it is, no matter what, it's going to be common to the Board of County Commissioners.
Ultimately, the county commissioners make a decision on.
So they would have to agree it.
Correct.
Okay, good.
My thought was kind of similar to Chair Hudson's, in the sense of, I think it's really important to have, and yours as well, but it's really important to have it in there that it's the Board of County Commissioners that are going to be approving or agreeing or officially formally the word request makes it sound like somebody can say no. And it seems like we want to make it clear that the board could say, we want to spend this money or do this, or we want to have this fee and then do this. But also it would be nice to have it clear in there that if a different department or individual or entity wants to say to the board, hey, look, can you look into this, that the avenue's there for them, while at the same time making it clear. So I would suggest some language like, if requested and approved, if requested by a entity and approved by the Board of County Commissioners, or, I mean, it gets tricky because I don't want to say if requested and approved by the Board of County Commissioners, because that makes it sound like the board is requesting and approving.
So why don't we,
I just don't want it
they're going
to
to sort
seem
the
like,
mechanism out for requesting, but the person or body that has to agree it is the Board of County Commissioners.
right. Yeah, I guess maybe it's not important to actually have it in the text saying that anybody can request it, as long as, maybe that's just a different process, making sure people know that there's an avenue there, and yeah.
But in
I
any
agree.
case, you can take our deliberation, if it varies in interpretation from what we finally get as a recommendation, to the board and say, well, this is what they were thinking about. Commissioner Altman.
Sorry, I had to re-log in. My video stopped. I agree with the other.
Oh, no.
Stopped again.
Stopped again.
This is literally my life when I'm on telehealth. Like, someone says something really important and it goes, and I'm like, oh, no.
So while we're waiting, can you try and formulate some of your tax bit? And I'll,
Mr. Chairman, I'm not quite ready to do that because it just occurred to me during this pre-conversation that there's another thing that I'm somewhat concerned about, and I'm not sure whether it needs to be included in the motion or not, but that is, in the event that the county commissioners opt in, I'm concerned that we wouldn't have some mechanism for annual reviews or that kind of thing if that occurred. So again, the staff might give us some guidance on that, but then I think we're getting close to being able to formulate our motion. So I don't know if staff members have any comment. Just theoretically, if the county commissioners 2 years from now said, let's opt in, what happens to this procedure if in fact we pass a motion?
Well, it's actually sort of a separate issue. Those existing businesses who are there, or new businesses, let's say if they opted in, would be subject to conditions of approval. So whether or not there's tax money, creating a committee to discuss it, that's kind of separate. So this would still be an annual report, just like they have to comply with odor, with noise, all of those criteria. That's still one of the criteria. I don't know if you have any clarification or.
I think, Tanya, I think you're exactly right. I think the question is, if the county opts back in, the Board of County Commissioners at that time could decide to continue to keep the code as is. They could open up a whole new process to completely eliminate the entire code, or they could do anything in between. We just don't know. So at this point, we just have the question before.
So at least the county commission would have the control to do that and to be able to make that choice.
Correct, although any code changes would come through the planning commission.
Right. Thanks.
Is that what you need? Mm-hmm. You now got two, or does that not need to be part of our motion? Okay, so could you just have a try on the tax bit? Just say it again.
Yes, if I could ask for what the phrasing that you guys used for this panel?
House Bill 3295 requires the Cannabis Advisory Panel. That's it now in state law.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I move that the review, no, that's the wrong word. I'm still scratching
Your
here.
motion, just give me the sense of what you want in the tax.
I'm trying to say that the annual review that's going on, if that's the right phrase, annual review or the inspection or the annual inspection, be at the request of the county commission in the future and incorporate the advisory panel as required by the bill, whatever the bill's number was.
3295.
3295.
Is it optional for us to have an advisory panel?
It is optional, but go ahead. I don't want to.
Okay, well, I'm assuming, that we want the taxes, right? But that's not optional for the
Right.
panel in order to get the tax money. So I think that we shouldn't be spending our tax money here if we don't, unless we're getting revenue from the state to cover
I mean,
this.
could we perhaps ask staff to pick that up and explain it on our behalf? In essence, I think we have, in general, the ability to accept the amendment as presented by staff to rescind the requirement for an annual county report and inspection that would require an agreement by the Board of County Commissioners on an annual basis to actually have a report issued. And then the tax bit, I think if we could pick that up as a report back from staff.
I think that would be okay, but I think it needs to be crystal clear that, in my opinion, that we need to be generating the revenue that's available to the county in order to do that, and to spend money for staffing and to do the work of the annual reports, as well as charging the companies that are getting the annual report in order to help fund this. In other words, I'm looking to not have unfunded mandates that we're putting together here.
Okay.
Yeah. Is it helpful for me to respond?
Yes.
The Board of Commissioners specifically asked that question, is this an unfunded mandate to the county in order to create this panel that then will make recommendations to the board? And my specific response was, yes, it is an unfunded mandate. However, we may be able to pay for that facilitation service with that panel with the tax money that we receive.
Right.
So that is a potential. In addition, then the separate topic is conducting the annual inspections and reviewing the reports, et cetera. That would be paid for specifically by the industry through these however many licensed businesses that we have at the time.
Through the fee that you've already established? Okay,
Correct.
got it. So Chair Hudson, I would go back to where you were headed.
Okay, can I try it? 'Cause I'm writing.
Please.
So then, basically, that we accept the amendment to rescind the annual county requirement to report and inspect marijuana grows, except when a request is received and agreed by the Board of County Commissioners.
Right. I'm not even sure I would throw in the word request there. I would just say unless the county commissioners determine, and that way it takes that entire
Well, but
issue out about who requests it.
then, I mean, you know, we were having a discussion that, well, maybe somebody from code compliance decides, well, we should really have and so there could be more than one route.
There could be multiple routes coming forward, and as long as the county commission agrees to it. In other words, that doesn't stop anyone from coming to the county commissioners and saying, please inspect. The county commissioners can decide whether they want to or not.
Okay, you love these pieces of in the weeds. So, but why wouldn't that be covered by a request without specifying where it's come from? Because the staff with the county commissioners are actually going to work that out, but the board ultimately has to agree it.
Because does that delineate then or beg the question, who has made the request, and you have to define that? If you don't define that, it leaves open, anyone could come forward and make
Yeah.
a request.
But it's got to be agreed by the board.
Right, that's the key point. Right, so I'm just in semantics now. Why even use the word request? Why not
Because
just say if
the
it's...
board may not request it.
I think
No, the board's not requesting it.
we
Go
should
ahead.
use a different word than request.
Okay,
Like approved, determined, agreed, any of those, but request is pretty confusing. I think that's
okay.
my opinion. At least that's how
Well,
that
it was
works.
in the original amendment.
Exactly. So I guess my addition to what you proposed would be something along the exact same lines, only with a different word.
So would you like to reformulate a motion, please?
Yeah, I would, I mean, I guess I wouldn't, my form of a motion doesn't read back all of that, so I'm not sure if that's okay, but I guess I would move to go ahead and recommend to the Board of County Commissioners that we rescind the requirement for annual inspections unless approved by the Board of County Commissioners. And I'm totally open to other people's suggestions on that. I think my comment was just whatever sentiments are in there are great, and I hope we could use a different word than request. And if other people disagree, that's fine. That's just where I'm coming out from it.
Mr. Chair,
I
Go
was
ahead,
going to say,
please.
it's exactly, Commissioner Curris stated exactly what I was trying to say.
So you're happy with that as a motion?
I am.
Could we have a seconder for that motion?
You don't want to second the motion, but you.
I'll be happy to second it, but I'm not sure where Commissioner Crawford is at the moment, so.
Okay, so do you want to challenge the motion?
I have a clarifying question,
Well, we have a motion on the table, though.
and I can still have a clarifying question.
Okay,
Okay.
and I'll second. So there, she made the motion, I
Now
seconded.
let's have
So-
a debate on, or a discussion on the motion, please. Commissioner Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've tossed around the word request, so my understanding is the word request goes to these folks from the Board of County Commissioners. And that's why I think that it's an important word to be in there, because you folks are the ones that are doing the annual report. And if the county commissioners request you to do that, you get to go do it. Am I clear on that? Is that how it works?
I will say that's,
Yes, whether the word is request or direct or. Yeah,
Right.
Yes, yes.
Direct.
So I'm not I'm not hung up on the word request, so if we want to come up with a different word that says the Board of County Commissioners is going to direct staff to conduct these observations and submit an annual report, then I can support this motion.
I would make a friendly amendment to my motion to just change it to direct. That works for me.
So could you restate your motion?
Mr. Chair, this is still discussing the motion. I was viewing this from a completely different set than you were, Commissioner Crawford, about who's making the request and who's doing the work. I was looking at it from any person in the county coming forward saying, hey, I want these guys to do a request, and the request, who are they requesting it to? The county commissioners, the community development department. And so at that point, there might be a coalition of people come forward, want to do that. There might be one individual, there might be 100, and the county commissioners can respond to that request and either say, yep or no, yeah, we're going to do it, and then they direct the staff to go do it. So that's where I was with the request, because defining request in the motion says, well, who's making the request? Is it this coalition of people? Is it one individual? Is it somebody that's got an axe to grind with one retailer? Is it, et cetera, et cetera? And so at that point, just by leaving that word out, just saying county commissioners can direct the staff to go do that, the county commissioners can receive that input from a variety of components through their normal methodology, from people just coming forward to them saying, hey, I'm concerned about this stuff. Are you guys inspecting? And the county commissioners can talk about it and say, yep, we're going to do it this year, and direct the staff to do it. So that was where I was coming from, the way I was thinking of it, as opposed to the county commissioners then requesting the staff to do it. So that was just sort of a flip, and I wanted to be clear what I was thinking. And I'm not sure any of us have any difference of opinion. It's just the semantics that we're struggling with right now.
Can I respond
Chair,
to
may I
that?
make a suggestion?
Go ahead, please, Commissioner Altman.
So I just pulled up, I'm looking at the language on my computer right now, and I'm just wondering if we change the words around, if it would make it a little bit more sense to say an annual report shall be submitted to the Community Development Department if requested by the Board of County Commissioners, as opposed to putting the if requested in the middle, because it seems like we're sort of getting hung up on maybe sentence structure. If we
No,
just
I
move
think
words
the
around a
issue
little bit,
was
would that
who
sound
could
better?
request. Go ahead,
Missed that?
please, Vice Chair Kiras.
The reason why the word direct makes more sense to me than request is because, and it truly at this point is a semantic issue, but request implies that you guys could say no. Like, would you like to come to my house this weekend? Like, no. But if I'm like, you need to come to my house this weekend, then you have to. So I like the word direct, but it's really not on my high list of things that are important to me. I agree with Chair Hudson that for me, the most important thing is just to specify who is allowed to make this request or direction or whatever. I think that's the most important part. So I'd be satisfied really with any word as long as it's clear that it's the board that's doing the deciding.
Okay, so we have your motion, though, on the floor.
Yeah, and I could make a friendly amendment to it to just say
Go ahead.
the motion is to rescind recommend to the Board of County Commissioners to rescind the requirement for annual inspections unless directed to do the annual inspections by the Board of County Commissioners.
Does that cause you any heartburn?
Maybe.
It doesn't create heartburn. I'm just understanding. So it sounds like we're changing it from an annual report shall be submitted, and as if I'm going to continue with what Commissioner Altman said, instead of an annual report shall be submitted to the Community Development Department if directed by the Board of County Commissioners. It sounds like the commission is interested in rescinding it unless directed to the. I'm just grappling with the context.
I understand. Exactly.
I think the key is if we stay with the if directed piece, there's no question, we staff will check in with the Board of County Commissioners on an annual basis. Are we doing this or not? The county commissioners may say, well, let's check with the Cannabis Advisory Panel, let's ask our constituents, let's ask the Planning Commission, let's ask anybody can request it or raise it, or it can be coming from code enforcement. All kinds of things can happen. The key is, if it's requested or directed, we are going to be checking in with the board annually to determine if we're doing it or not.
You would do that as your formal function, and so that doesn't need to be part of our recommendation.
Right.
So would you be happy with that we accept the amendment to rescind the requirement for a county annual inspection and report unless directed by the Board of County Commissioners?
Yes, and in fact, that was what I was struggling to say, but I couldn't,
Okay, so
too many
Yeah,
words.
let's leave it there.
And the second agrees with that, as you stated.
Very good. So hopefully our recording secretary will take what the chairman just said. And Commissioner Altman, are you okay with that? No? Or yes, no? I can choose? Yes.
I would say
Very good.
no
I choose
comment,
yes.
I'm okay.
Okay, any further discussion before we put it to a vote? And don't ask me to read what we're voting on. I think we all understand it too well. Commissioner Schlischer votes.
Yes.
Commissioner Crawford.
Votes yes.
Commissioner
Definitely.
Vice Chair Kiras.
Definitely a yes.
Commissioner Altman.
Yes.
Passed unanimously. What else do you need?
We're good.
Yeah. So
No,
just
I
to be-
think
if
we've
I-
all been locked up for too long. Okay, so let's go then to our,
May I just,
Please.
for my own skull, just to confirm, so the recommendation, you're not necessarily you're telling the Board of County Commissioners you would like to recommend rescinding the annual reporting unless requested or directed by the board, but that is not necessarily what will be directed in the language itself. Will the rescinding part, is
we're
that?
accepting what you're saying, but the requirement, the if required, should be if directed.
Directed.
Is that correct?
Yeah, but if I understand your question, are you asking if the word rescinded that we're suggesting the word rescinded go into the text?
Yeah, I'm asking that.
No.
Or if you're just talking about.
We're just,
We're just talking about your amendment would rescind it.
Okay.
And we agree with that. But unless it's actually directed by the Board of County Commissioners.
I think we got that, yes.
it's kind of like a description of your amendment.
Yes.
rather than-
Thank you. That's helpful, yes. And it should be noted that likely there might be some more wordsmithing at the next stage.
No, that's okay.
also.
Had we reiterated your amendment, we would have been here another hour. And I think that would probably not be a great use of time. Unless you disagree, in which case I would obviously defer to your,
No, I'm good, thank you.
thank you. All right. So, Nick, if you know what you're doing next, I presume it's you that's doing it, or is it Tanya?
It's Tanya again.
Oh. So they put your name at the top out of respect.
Oh, did they?
Yeah.
Okay. Once again, excuse me, sorry, my mic is a little sensitive. Tanya Saltzman, Senior Planner, Long Range. This item is to discuss Senate Bill 391, Rural Accessory Dwelling Units. I am going to share my screen again. Bear with me, please. It will never go into presentation mode, but I hope you'll bear with me like this. So, this is meant as a general overview of Senate Bill 391, which recently passed. I gave the commission a memo that goes into a large amount of detail, I will say, with an extensive matrix explaining many of the components of this bill. The purpose of this discussion tonight is not to go into every single little clause of the bill, because this is going to be an ongoing discussion with both the board and presumably the Planning Commission over the next several months, if not a little bit longer than that. So I just wanted to give you in that memo a taste of the types of things that are going to be decision points and the things that that staff is going to have to look at, that the state's going to have to look at, et cetera. But the purpose of today is just to give a general overview and not to get into the details of each individual provision, because it's a biggie. And we will be back for sure to discuss those things more in a more detailed way. So with that, I'm going to give a general overview of Senate Bill 391. And Nick, please feel free to jump in since this is also your baby. So, and I will preface this by saying that Senate Bill 762 and Senate Bill 391 are tied up in a great big knot. And 762 is a wildfire hazard mitigation bill. Kyle Collins, our associate planner here, is going to present his overview of that bill at the next Planning Commission meeting, which I believe is August 12th. So a few things in this bill, 391, are actually dependent upon those wildfire provisions in 762. So there's a little bit of kind of many layers of an onion here, so I'll do my best to explain that. But to get into the real details of the wildfire aspects, you will have to wait until August 12th. But this will give you a general taste of kind of what those requirements how those will relate to rural accessory dwelling units. So, in general, Senate Bill 391 authorizes a county to allow an owner of a lot or parcel within a rural residential zone to construct one accessory dwelling unit, otherwise known as an ADU, subject to certain restrictions and limitations. It doesn't obligate a county to allow ADUs. They don't have to do this if they don't choose to. And it doesn't prohibit counties from imposing additional restrictions, such as garages, outbuildings, other things to be determined. The way staff is kind of organizing this in our heads is there's three buckets of decision points or of criteria. The first is development criteria, which are fairly straightforward for the most part. Some will require clarification or decisions from the board. These are regular things that the Planning Division deals with all the time. The size of the building, the distance from the primary dwelling, things like that, regular development items. The next piece, or the next chunk bucket, is wildfire. This, like I just said, is largely dependent on decisions that are going to be made at the state level per Senate Bill 762. So there's a lot of things, in addition to saying your building can only be this size, it also has to comply with a lot of wildfire criteria. These are matters that generally the county doesn't really have much say over. This is coming top down from the state, and we kind of have to. There are ways to participate, but largely it comes from the top down from the state, and we have to wait for those processes to go through, and then before we can apply the law in our own county. And then lastly, and this is fairly small, but procedural options, as part of the decision points that the board will make, they need to decide how to process these applications, either ministerially or as a land use decision, and I'll go into that later. But that's kind of the nuts and bolts of when someone actually wants to apply for this, how does that happen? What do they need to provide to the Planning Division? Or what do they need to prove in their burden of proof? And that's kind of an administrative thing, but we wanted to keep everybody apprised of that. So the basic eligibility criteria, rural residential zones, it has to be an RR10, MUA, SR2.5, and UAR10. Those are considered our rural residential zones in Deschutes County. And yes, it is very difficult to say rural residential many times. That parcel has to be 2 acres in size or more. There has to be one single-family dwelling already on that lot or parcel. And no portion of that lot or parcel can be within a designated area of critical state concern. Here, I believe that's the Metolius area of statewide concern. Those are the very, very basic criteria, just the kind of first tier. I believe the map was included in your packet. It's very, very general, but we did a general kind of analysis just using that basic level of criteria to see how many properties could potentially meet the criteria, and we came up with about 7,800, plus another 149 dwellings that currently are under construction. So there's not yet a dwelling there, but there are active building permits, so the presumption is that those would be followed through, and there would eventually be a building on it. And so that leaves us with about just under 8,000 total properties currently eligible. And a big caveat is that this does not include vacant properties. You may have seen a larger number being put out there. I think it was 9,800 or something like that. That number, it's not inaccurate. It's just a different way of looking at things. That also includes vacant lots. So our count, you have to have a single-family dwelling already on that lot or parcel to qualify, because that is one of the criteria of the bill. In theory, these vacant lots, once you build that single-family lot, then you can go ahead with all the rest of the ADU, but we wanted to look at it in the near term, who's technically eligible pretty much immediately. So that's where that number comes from. And again, this is without additional criteria. So that's kind of the largest possible number as we see it right now in our preliminary analysis. So now I'm just going to go over some of the development criteria, some of the highlights that I've pulled from that matrix, and I just might talk a little bit about some of them and what decision points or kind of thoughts we might have about these. And these are going to be worked through with the board as time goes on. For instance, the minimum 2-acre lot size. In areas where there's groundwater concerns, South County, there is potential to consider a larger lot size. If it can't handle septics on 2-acre lots, this is going to be an item for consideration. And we'll probably look to our environmental soils people to provide more insight into that and what the realities on the ground might be. The ADU can't include more than 900 square feet of usable floor area. So part of this, the variable is what is usable floor area? And this can be interpreted several different ways. If anyone's ever looked at kind of real estate floor plans, they can differ greatly from other types of plans and other calculations. So that's another thing that needs to be determined. We would likely work with our building department to look at how they define it, as well as reach out to perhaps other jurisdictions and see what the best practices are to make it very clear and very easily interpretable. Similarly, the ADU is required to be located no further than 100 feet from the existing single-family dwelling. So the question that arises here is, does that mean the whole thing needs to be within 100 feet? Does that mean one little roof corner can be within that 100 square feet? How do you determine that? So this is another decision point that we'll work with amongst staff and with the board to determine. A biggie, as I've mentioned, is the statewide wildfire risk maps have to be approved. This is a criteria in the bill, and this is part of Senate Bill 762. These are a set of maps that they are going to drill down to the parcel basis for the entire state and determine, based on a definition that the state, I believe the Board of Forestry is going to create for, I believe it's 5 categories of hazard. The extreme, high, moderate, that type of thing. So they're going to make these definitions and then create a map that categorizes every single parcel in the state. The ADU the language in the bill says that these maps must be approved. And so the deadline that was given in Senate Bill 762 for the creation of these maps is June of 2022. As you imagine, it's quite a big project. There's a lot of technical aspects. There also is an appeal process. And these are things that Kyle will speak to when he talks about 762 in a couple of weeks. But there is an appeal process for the public if they disagree with their categorization. It's a big project. So that's the main hurdle that we see right now in terms of time. That's the biggest kind of putting on the brakes for the rural ADUs. We will be working on other matters contained in this bill in the interim, but that's kind of a hard stop as we interpret it right now.
Could you just say what the categories were again? You said, was it low, medium, high, or?
I believe, I would have to get back to you on that. I believe extreme and high are the top 2.
There are 5 categories.
Yeah.
And then likely if it's in a 4 or 5, it would need to meet additional standards.
Yes, and the expectation based on previous wildfire things, and again, this is something that Kyle will go into, is that the vast majority of Deschutes County will likely be in those top 2 categories for fairly obvious reasons. But that's the expectation. We don't know, but that is based on the Community Wildfire Protection Plan process. All of that, all indications point to such. So.
And the county determines that?
It will be determined at the state level as part of the mapping process. So this Senate Bill 762, which is the wildfire bill, requires the state to develop these statewide wildfire risk maps, and they'll categorize everything in those 5 categories.
But the county actually is going to submit a map to the state.
No, the county has no, the county has done work on this in the past. Like we have maps that are very similar in nature, but because of, this bill dictates that it's coming from the state level. So it's kind of we had done a little bit on our own, and now this is kind of a larger project coming in and doing that on a larger geographic range.
I mean, once people get worried about their classification and their loss of insurance, then I would imagine you're going to probably be lucky to get it through by 2022.
It's quite a process, and Kyle will provide you with the actual text of 762, but it prescribes kind of how that's done, and it's pretty intense. It's pretty amazing how they're going to do that, and they set up committees and boards, and they're mapping technology. It's a huge project. It's really it's fascinating, and it's a big project. But the goal, and that's prescribed in the bill, is June 2022.
Would we like a copy of the bill in advance of Kyle talking? I mean, it seems like it'd be worthwhile just having a look at that.
Senate Bill 762? Oh, certainly we can forward that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So as part of that, to continuing on the wildfire part of things, 391 states that the ADU must comply with the Oregon Residential Specialty Code relating to wildfire hazard mitigation for the mapped area. And this is an interesting one, and there's still a couple of interpretations out there. And I should say that in general, with a lot of the wildfire things that relate to Senate Bill 762, a lot of people are trying to figure it out right now, whether that's DLCD or the State Board of Forestry. I think all the minds are working across the state trying to figure out how these two bills relate to each other. In reality, 391 passed a little bit before 762, so there's a few kind of references that don't quite line up, but we're relying on DLCD and other experts to try to kind of figure that out. And that is something that unfortunately is not generally done at the county level, but it's going to be done above us and kind of hopefully trickle down to us with an interpretation that we can work with to implement our own ordinances.
Yeah, I think what the key is, and I specifically have been asking the Association of Oregon Counties, the Oregon Home Builders Association, Department of Land Conservation and Development, this past week of trying to understand this Oregon Residential Specialty Code. This is the fire hardening piece. And I think that there's agreement that we don't have to wait until all of those fire hardening requirements are complete. What we have to wait for is when the maps are done. When the maps are done, then we can apply R327 to these areas that are going to be designated 4 and 5. Now, the fire hardening is going to be updated separately, and that's where I think we had a little bit of confusion initially when we were presenting this to the Board of Commissioners just a couple of weeks ago, not sure what that relationship was, because that may not happen until October of 2022 or April of 2023, which really pushes it further out there. But I think there's consensus now between Association of Oregon Counties, Department of Land Conservation and Development, the Department of Consumer and Business Affairs, which oversees the State Building Codes Division, who does the fire hardening piece. They're all in agreement that there's not that connection, that we don't have to wait that long. The real key is waiting for the maps to be done. But yeah, not to confuse it further, but we had a lot of other questions about how far does this go out.
So let's just pause a second. Commissioners, including Commissioner Altman, who I can't see, any questions for Tanya at this point? And the reviews, the appeals after the classification will be conducted by the state or by the county?
Yeah, the county is no longer involved. That was a fundamental shift when we were initially talking about the R327, the specialty codes, was based on a map that we created. That fundamentally changed with Senate Bill 762, that is now conducted by the state, with property owners who may appeal that.
And does that go to LUBA?
It won't go to LUBA, because I don't think those maps will be a land use decision. So that would be something that, I don't know what that appeals process is. If somebody disagrees with the state's initial map, then I'm sure the first appeal will go to something like the Department of Forestry, but that if they then disagree with the Department of Forestry, then perhaps it goes to the Court of Appeals or Circuit Court or something. There will be another appeals process beyond that to be determined.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, that's, it's a rapidly evolving interpretation of everything. I mean, every day there's kind of a new conversation saying, oh, okay, I think the interpretation of this relationship is this. So we are kind of rolling with it as we gather this intelligence. So it is a moving target. We're doing the best we can. But as far as that, the building code things, that's the latest and greatest.
There won't be an interim map before the appeals are all finished.
Well, good question. So my guess is it'll probably be sometime in spring where they would come out with the map and then the appeals process. I don't know what that whole timeline looks like just yet.
Okay, moving on. Oh, sorry, did I miss? So next, and this is more wildfire, the lot or parcel and the ADU have to comply with the rules of the State Board of Forestry under ORS 477.015 to 477.061. And this is another one of those references that gets a little tenuous because ORS 477 essentially defines the wildland urban interface, which used to be called the forest land urban interface. So it's defining these areas that are sensitive to wildfire. Senate Bill 762 also amends ORS 477. So it's changing that definition of the wildland urban interface. And they're looking at nationwide best practices, consulting their experts, and they're defining what those 5 levels are, what that actually means. I'm not sure if it's quantifiable or however they decided, and they determine that and record it. And that will relate to likely to defensible space requirements. So this is another thing where it's a little bit of wait and see. So it depends what we do with our ADUs and what requirements they'll be subject to depends on this new definition of the wildland urban interface. And we have to wait for that. So subsequently, the next item here, number 6, if the ADU is not subject to ORS 477, et cetera, in other words, the way we interpret that is it's not in the wildland urban interface, then it has to have its own defensible space and fuel break standards developed in consultation with local fire protection service providers. So the general gist of it is that they're going to define the WUI, wildland urban interface, and there will be a set of defensible space requirements at the state level for most places. If you don't fall in that category, you have to figure that out with your rural fire protection district. And we don't know where that balance will be, who will be subject to what. That's part of what we have to wait and see. But it's trying to address defensible space primarily. So
What's going to be so interesting, and this is going to be the discussion that I've started to hear at the state level, is generally when people think about the wildland urban interface, just to use the city of Bend, for example, you're going to have the city of Bend, and then you're going to take a mile around it and say, okay, that's the wildland urban interface. But there's a whole nother theory of thought, which is it's really anywhere where rural development interacts with the natural environment. So when we look at the map that we have in the packet, the WUI may not contemplate what we have in Deschutes County, which is scattered rural development. I mean, all over the county. I mean, well, not further east of Milliken, but the WUI could be very generally defined that all these areas that we have could very well be. We just don't know. It's so much is to be determined.
It's not, presumably it's not going to be just a ring around the city and that's it.
Right.
It's going to be much more dispersed and much, yeah.
Exactly.
Well,
So
it's
we
going
just,
to be much more granular, I presume.
Exactly.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And for which the state has no mechanism, I'm sure.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
For which I'm sure the state has no mechanism for defining that granularity except by working with the counties.
That was one of the very key issues on the very last day of the session was defining the WUI. There was one general definition in Senate Bill 762. Everybody kind of retreated from the bill. They then said, okay, let's take it out of the bill and let's defer it to rulemaking, which is going to be conducted by the Department of Forestry with a committee they just identified today. So that definition is to be determined now over the next several months by this committee and the Oregon Department of Forestry. Very, very important rulemaking coming up.
So, because by the time Kyle comes, we may have lost you by then, and I know you've been very close to this, if you don't mind, maybe we could ask, and please, it's not to insult you. So, the hazard mapping process, so I mean, if you take, because we've all visited it, Tollgate,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, that is an area with a certain level of risk. But within it, you have people who pick up and people who don't pick up. And the level of risk between those two houses are as great or as least as the whole county, if we only have two levels. So, I mean, Tollgate will presumably just be colored in bright red, and it'll be left to some appeal process to actually get the granularity.
For individual property owners to then appeal their designation to the state, that's right.
And then presumably the chairman of the Householders Association will do all the work for them.
Right, exactly.
With a handsaw and a bucket and a shovel, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's quite a project.
Any other questions that I've so rudely stopped her? Please. Commissioner Swisher.
Well, Tanya's going through the criteria, but I just wanted to express an opinion about number 8. I'm extremely happy that number 8 is on there, and that, and Nick, I don't know if you had any influence in testifying for or against that component, but again, I think we'd have really been remiss to allowed ADUs and then had them all go to vacation use, especially here in Deschutes County, as opposed to addressing the housing needs, so.
I can just share with you the committee, as it was initial, and this, I was on the initial committee that drafted the initial concepts, and the initial concept said that both the primary dwelling and the ADU could not both be used as short-term rentals. But it left one of them open to short-term rentals. So it was, after 3 legislative sessions during the final hearings, it was determined that the ADU shall not be used for a short-term vacation rental. Counties could still decide that neither should be, but that's a local decision.
And I'll note
I
that,
think it could be well chewed over, because if you look in other places, and if you think about Commissioner Chang's desire to help small farmers, having an ADU, which may be not a vacation rental, but, you know, if you have some appropriate farming activity permitted, but then you have people coming to stay while they're doing that. That's one of the major sources of wealth for small farms in almost the whole of the developed world.
Right, and that's an agritourism issue, which I agree is a separate topic.
Yes, no, it is, absolutely. But, you know, that's the other side of the issue in terms of, do ADUs only solve the housing problem?
And small farmers, I mean, farmers in Deschutes County and across the state, there are provisions to allow for farm help dwellings. It's just that there are certain standards that have to be met for that. So, and anyway, I'm not sure, it's difficult to meet those standards in Deschutes County for all kinds of reasons, but it's point well taken.
I'll also note that when we did our historic ADU program, with the vacation rentals, that was the either-or scenario. You can either rent the ADU out short-term or your primary dwelling. So I guess that probably, they started with that maybe and ran with it and then undid that and changed it through the process. And I'll just stick with that one for right now, but the question that will come up is, you know, how do we require a restrictive covenant? What is the mechanism for actually, you know, not allowing short-term vacation rentals? Or do we just say you can't do a short-term vacation rental? Is there an enforcement, you know, that type of thing? These are, again, things, food for thought, that the board and, you know, I believe we'll have the public, an extensive public process throughout this whole thing. And, you know, I'm sure the public will have a lot of opinions on that matter in particular.
Well, at least 2 cities in the county have addressed that by setting particular ratios in a process. So, again, that perhaps is something in the future the county needs to look at.
Yes. I'm going to jump back to number 7 briefly. Local regulations have to ensure that the ADU has adequate access for firefighting equipment, safe evacuation, and staged evacuation areas. And this is one that we're just starting to wrestle with, and we're realizing that it's bigger than we think. And so this will be a project for staff, and we need to determine, you know, is that, say we're talking about a road dimension, it needs to be a certain number of feet. I'm just simplifying. Are we coordinating with the road department on that? Are we prescribing in the code that it needs to be 20 feet wide, or what, you know, are we referencing other safety requirements? These are the kind of things that we're going to have to work through, talking with the fire departments, what they determine adequate access to be, safe evacuation, as well as the road department. So that's going to be a big staff project to coordinate with our fellow.
Because they may not be alternatives. They may be all included.
Right. And it's, you know, do we list every road? Do we list every subdivision? Or do we provide just those criteria in the code? So, and we don't know. We don't know, does every place have adequate access, or does how do we determine that? So that's a big one that we're going to be working on.
You'll have enough time by the time all the hazard mapping appeals are going through, don't worry.
It does give us time, I will say.
And we can't emphasize enough how important this decision is to make up front, because either the county does a lot of this work up front, we determine the clear and objective criteria, we map it, we do whatever, or we put it on the property owner as each one comes in. Well, if each one comes in, that could then be a discretionary process, which people could then appeal and say, well, and that could be that could not be the intention of what we're intending to do. So that's a big decision point.
Right, and then at the same time, on the other side of that, is it feasible for the county to be able to examine every single road in the county and say,
Right.
that's a huge project in itself? Are we getting surveyors to look at every road to make sure the angle is right? That type of thing.
Yep.
So these are things that we're adding to the list to play with over the next year and see how we can make the best.
That
best
may be the
ordinance.
way that true safety lies for wildfire problems. Because if you're going now just suddenly double the housing density locally, I mean, you really are creating a very different dynamic.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
We could be putting it on the rural homeowners associations.
Well, and you'll have Peter Rosenberg on as well.
Yes.
I mean, the two of you.
That was a pointed comment.
Yeah. Well noted.
But those are some of the highlights of kind of items that we're going to be considering over the next essentially year, we think. And then lastly, I just want to touch on the procedural options, and we've kind of acknowledged this a little bit, but will it be a ministerial decision? In other words, we set out the standards in the code. There's no discretion from staff. You just have to, comply with all these things that we outlined very specifically in the code, check the box, and that's it. We define what adequate access means. Your road has to be 20 feet wide, and you can't have trees that are this low, whatever that is. Or do we do a land use decision that Nick alluded to, where there's a notice of application, there can be a notice of decision, there's a little more public outreach, potential for appeal, and that puts the onus on the applicant to demonstrate adequate access. So it's kind of are you front-loading it, are you doing it with the application? And that's a lot to kind of parse out as well. And
So this whole process effectively is between the board and the state, is it? And then implementation via the staff, for which we will receive updates? Or is there likely to be any decision-making recommendations that you're going to require from the board from the Planning Commission in the future, do you think?
I think that's the threshold question. Well, first of all, any code will have to come through the Planning Commission.
Right.
But I think the key question is, as Tanya mentioned, we can have additional local standards. The law is very clear. And one of those that you see that we proposed in here, just for consideration, do we want to consider any larger minimum lot size for example, southern Deschutes County, to protect the groundwater in that region? Maybe it's not 2 acres, maybe it's 5 acres, because you have to cite different types of septic systems in different regions of the county. But the real question is going to be, does the Board of Commissioners, do they want to have community conversations to define and decide other areas? I mean, another one could be, we're not going to cite them, or we're going to have a different lot size in wildlife area combining zones. There's not a lot in wildlife area combining zones, but there are some. So that's still a threshold question for the board of how do they want to even approach this process and this project, which is going to be a big undertaking.
Sure. Or Tumalo or Terrebonne, where
Exactly.
actually the septic
Exactly.
problems are not groundwater-based only. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. This is just a brief timeline, conceptual. June 2021 is the passage of the bill. We anticipate the initial wildland-urban interface definition, in other words, ORS 477 that I was speaking of, should be defined by fall 2021 or winter of 2022, excuse me. June 2022 is when we believe the wildfire risk statewide map will be adopted. That's the requirement right now. And this currently has this April 2023 box about the building code standards, but we think that that's probably not the case as of press time. We're working with other counties, as Nick noted, and we just are kind of getting the current interpretation is that we won't actually have to wait that long and comply with those building standards. We can do it on our own at the county level, say we're going to comply with this highest level of fireproof building or some other alternative. So that April 2023 date is a little soft. That might go away. But I'm just putting it there for just full disclosure.
No, that's very helpful, actually, not least of which for the vice chair. We could look for a very exciting year if she decides to go that way. That and the comprehensive plan update. I mean, it's going to be a lot of interesting things. Commissioners, any questions, comments, and including Commissioner Altman, if you're still there, Susan? Oh.
I'm here, but I don't have any comments, no.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Further questions, comments? I must admit, I was hoping it was going to be a faster process to protect us against wildfire. It seems like a very bureaucratic thing that's been put together.
It's very large, I will say.
Not a lot of, well, I'll stop there before I get into trouble. Staff comments and commissioners' comments. Perhaps, Tanya, could we ask you to kick us off with any other additional comments, unless I've forgotten something on the...
Pertaining to this topic or just in general? Or
Well, are you finished? We had no questions for you.
This one last
Oh,
slide
I'm
to
sorry,
tell
I
you
thought
that.
it was your last
It's
slide.
okay. Just in terms of the process, we're going to continue, I've kind of stated it already, but we're going to continue to monitor the evolving interpretations, and we're going to report back to the Board of County Commissioners probably quarterly, maybe a little bit more frequently than that if something kind of shakes out prior to that. And we can determine our interaction with the Planning Commission as part of that as well. I think the board will make decisions, like Nick just said, on kind of the public engagement strategy and all of that, but we will certainly be circling back and providing updates as much as the Planning Commission would like. And opportunities for input, of course. And we're going to begin working on the provisions that we can kind of touch now, not the statewide stuff, but the stuff that we can do in the local level. So we're going to be starting to look at the emergency access piece and things like that, and getting our ducks in a row so that we'll be ready as close as humanly possible to when those wildfire maps are released. So we'll be kind of ready to go and begin the traditional kind of text amendment ordinance adoption process as quickly as possible. And just to your point, Chair Hudson, about the wildfire stuff, it's really, and I'll send you the copy of 762, but it is, it's 25 pages. It does prescribe a lot of details in the process, a little bit more than I expected, although I think there's so much that needs to be determined, and they're working it out. There's been a lot of meetings already trying to figure out kind of the exact processes and responsibilities and potential hiccups. So, and 762 covers a lot more than just land use. They also, touch on things like fire education and utilities, so they are responsible for what responsibility they have for kind of protecting from wildfire. We're not going to touch on those because that's beyond our purview, but 762 is a very large bill that covers a lot and has a ton of details. So we'll send that to you as soon as we can after this meeting. And that's all I have.
So I don't put my foot in it again. Are you just breathing in, or are you finished? Any questions on the codicil that we just had? Susan? No, Susan.
Unshare.
Okay, thank you.
No, I'm shaking my head no.
No, we couldn't see you, unfortunately, you were off. Okay, so let's, in that case, change the order. You sent round, so we're on to staff and Planning Commission comments. Commissioner Altman, you sent round two very thought-provoking documents, which I think everybody received, and I'm sure at least some of us read. But other than that, anything that you wish to comment on or raise with us, for us?
No other specific comments. I just thought that given the recent conversations we've had, both of those articles were interesting, especially the New York Times article about water and development. It will be interesting to see, where things go in the West as droughts continue and more people move to places like the Deschutes County, where I know we have, depending on what irrigation district you're in and what's going on, it seems like there's a lot of water, but there's also a lot of pressure to service people and farmland. So I'm just curious to see how that goes. And interesting to hear what, if anything's being considered in the county or the cities.
Yeah, I think your assumption that there's a lot of water may be correct, but I think it's not very homogeneously spread around the county. Some of the irrigation districts already now have 1 week without water and 1 week with water, and the fields are going conspicuously yellow, which of course will increase the fire risk when the lightning comes as well. Thank you. If I may, Vice Chair Kiras, any comments or questions or anything?
I just have a little fun announcement. I am going to be presenting a talk on swimming in Oregon's lakes and rivers. Getting into swimming if you're not a swimmer or you kind of know how to swim, but you're uncomfortable with swimming in open water. And it's going to be presented by Oregon Wild, which is a great conservation group, as part of their cheering and championing and supporting of the River Democracy Act, speaking of water. So if you're not familiar with that, they have information on their website, but the talk is going to be on August 4th at 6 p.m. and I believe it's free, but they're having a raffle. And they actually have an ongoing series called Wild Wednesdays where they have just different people come and talk about different cool things in rivers. The last one was about lamprey.
The venue is?
Oregon Wild, and it's actually,
But it's
a Zoom. It's on Zoom now, yeah.
Okey-doke. Commissioner Crawford, please.
Just an update on Terrebonne. ODOT has put a plan together for the roads up there. We had an advisory meeting a couple of weeks ago. I'm not at liberty to say what that plan is currently because there's some issues with property. So there's something in the works, and we're going to have a community meeting sometime, probably early August. And so then we'll know what's going on up there.
And will that likely be on Zoom also?
I'm
Well,
guessing
in person.
probably not.
Not Zoom?
Yeah.
It'll be in person?
I think the meeting's going to be held in the, grade school in Terrebonne.
Thank you. Commissioner Zulshi?
I have a couple of comments. First, during the month of September, I'll be on Zoom, at least the first meeting. And, but I do enjoy being back in person. So this is a good start back, I think. That's great. And my second comment is, as of this July, I'm entering my last year on the Planning Commission. And so that means there's about 20 meetings left when you can hear me comment about water, transportation, and high-speed communication infrastructure. So just forewarning that that's still topics near and dear to my heart.
You could always leave us some recordings in advance. Isaac Asimov wrote a whole book about that. If I may, just one thing from the chair. There was a very, very good webinar on Monday organized by the League of Oregon Cities and the Association of Oregon Counties about broadband, where the various bits of the counties in Oregon are at in terms of their development, what they're using it for, who's the active groups, and where's the money going to come from in the future. Obviously, this is in preparation for the infrastructure bill. I'd highly recommend, if you're interested, that you have a look at it. On Friday, an edited version, so the breakout groups, unfortunately, were not recordable. So ORCities, all one word, .org, and you can listen to the whole thing if you wish. Some really very good innovation. Almost every county has some task force of some sort or other who are pushing very hard, and some of them have really gotten quite far down the pike. One of them that occurs to me, I think it was Grant County, who's using it as a way, broadband infrastructure introduction, to try and stop depopulation of the county, which I thought was a very innovative way of doing it. I mean, the curve, whereas Deschutes is going like that, Grant County, I think it was Grant County, was going like that. And so the gentleman presenting was really very compelling to listen to. Nick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll have four updates. First, our next meeting, our first meeting in August, we will have Chanel here to record the meeting minutes in person. You'll have the opportunity to meet her, and we'll have the pre-meeting meal again for the first time. We'll begin. So we'll at that point begin to survey you to find out who's going to attend, and then who's going to attend in person, so that we can plan accordingly for the pre-meeting meal. Number two, tomorrow, Chair Hudson, County Commission Chair Tony DeBone, and myself, because Peter's out, will interview two candidates for the Southern Deschutes County position on the Planning Commission, and hopefully make a recommendation tomorrow to the Board of Commissioners for hopefully an appointment in pretty short order. Most likely before your next meeting, I will be able to announce in coordination with Tom Anderson, an interim community development director. It may be a hybrid approach. It may be one division manager is appointed as the interim or acting community development director that oversees kind of the department, the budget, code enforcement, any HR, all the big picture topics. And then we might have a lower step, which is the way it used to be, planning director interim. And that very well would be then Peter, who would then provide the primary staff assistance to the Planning Commission and the Board of Commissioners until we select a new community development director. The first round of the applications close August 6th. We'll meet very quickly to determine who to interview as a first round at the end of August. And then I would really expect for the commission or commissioners or the chair, we haven't decided yet who, to participate in the second round, which is will be scheduled for late September. They'll in a series of panel interviews, I'm sure.
Do you have any notion as to what level of interest this has provoked?
I don't know at this point. Often a lot of people will wait until the last week to apply, so we don't. I don't have a sense yet at this point, and I'm sure that the housing costs in Bend are not helping the situation, but I don't have a sense yet.
You could throw in a few ADUs, maybe.
Yeah, throw in housing assistance. And just the final point was, I did share with the Planning Commission and the Board of Commissioners today and our management team, just the rules that the LCDC that we adopted earlier today on interim sheltering on lands outside of urban growth boundaries. It's a very big deal for areas when the governor declares and issues an executive order declaring a state of emergency with the Conflagration Act. It does provide opportunities to allow an RV or a couple of RVs or yurts or manufactured dwellings. There's a lot of opportunities to be able to house displaced people. But there's a lot of rules that address it. It's just not a free-for-all. There are rules about how it actually plays out and important things. But it's a really important rule to adopt, just given the circumstances that we're in, and it's a matter of when we enact the rules and apply them. As we know, unfortunately, it's not if. We certainly will be in a position, I'm sure, to utilize them at some point. So, but a very big, I think, very important rules that we adopted today, and they'll issue a press release probably tomorrow or sometime soon. So, with that, happy to answer any other questions that you may have.
We're good. So you have one more meeting, two more meetings?
One more meeting. We won't be meeting the second meeting in August.
And that's the first one with food?
I'm sorry?
It's the last one with Nick, but the first one with food.
Right. That's right. There's an intersection there.
I just have one little clerical thing. I don't know if you all noticed that our agenda system changed. I think I alluded to that in the email. It'll be smoother next time. I'll just say that. So I don't know if you noticed any difference. It looks a little bit different, but we're still working on how it gets distributed. I'll be the one in the future distributing that. It used to come kind of automatically through Peter, and now it'll come manually through me. So just if you have any issues with all of that stuff, contact me and I will try to get an answer. It won't, yeah, I'll leave it at that. We're going to figure it out and you will get your agenda. It'll just.
Did Peter do it automatically if you're doing it manually?
It was a different system. It was something called Minute Track, and the contract just expired, and the county chose to switch over to what's called Muni Code, and the way it kind of distributes things, it's just a completely different software system. So the way it generates agendas and distributes things and posts it on the website, the meeting portal website is going to change, although right now they're both active, so that's a little confusing. So if you have any questions, just contact me and I will send you the documents. Thanks for your patience. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much indeed. At 19:25 for our European colleagues, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.